The howling started at sundown, and Sable knew it meant the end of everything. She stood in the gallery above the throne hall of Carveth, hidden behind the stone lattice where servants watched ceremonies they were never meant to attend. Below her, 1,000 wolves filled the ancient hall, their voices rising and falling in ritual chant as torchlight painted the walls in shades of blood and gold. The binding rite. She should not have been there. She should have stayed in the apothecary where she belonged, grinding herbs and boiling tinctures for wolves who would never know her name. But Rannoch had promised her, had sworn on the marrow of his ancestors that the binding rite was a formality, a political performance, nothing more. "I will speak your name before the realm," he had told her 3 nights ago, his forehead pressed to hers in the darkness of the cellar where they always met. "When the elder asks me to choose, I will choose you. I do not care what the council wants. I do not care what they threaten. You are my bonded Sable. My wolf chose you before my mind even understood what was happening." She had believed every word. Now she crouched behind the lattice with her knees drawn to her chest, watching the man she loved stand rigid on the dais in ceremonial armor. His jaw was clenched so tight the muscle jumped beneath his skin. His hands hung at his sides like dead things. He looked wrong. Sable had spent 11 months memorizing every detail of Rannoch Ashbourne. The way he tilted his head when he was amused. The loose, predatory grace of his walk. The warmth that flooded his gaze whenever it found her across a crowded room. A private fire that burned for her alone. None of that was present now. He stood like a man carved from flint. His eyes held nothing. "The candidates will present themselves," the Grand Elder called, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. 4 women ascended the dais steps. Each wore the white ceremonial gown of a binding candidate, each one the daughter of a bloodline older than the fortress itself. They moved with the practiced elegance of wolves raised to rule. But it was the 4th woman who silenced the hall. Vaelith Morghaven. Her hair fell past her waist in a cascade of pale copper, and her green eyes swept the assembled wolves with the calm confidence of someone who already knew the outcome. House Morghaven controlled the iron mines of the Western Reaches, commanded the largest standing army outside the Crown's forces, and had been positioning Vaelith for the king's side since she turned 16. Sable's fingers dug into the stone lattice until her knuckles went white. "Look at me," she willed him. "Just look up. You will remember the clearing by the river where your wolf recognized mine. You will remember the night you bit the inside of my wrist and told me the mark would bind us beyond death." Her wrist throbbed beneath the sleeve of her dress, a small crescent-shaped scar where his teeth had broken her skin during the full moon, sealing a bond that was supposed to be unbreakable. "Rannoch Ashbourne, Alpha King of Carveth, blood of the founding pack," the Grand Elder intoned. "The candidates stand before you. The realm awaits your word. Speak your chosen's name." The silence was suffocating. Sable stopped breathing. The scar burned white-hot against her pulse, and she pressed her other hand over it, willing the heat to reach him. Rannoch opened his mouth, and for one fleeting heartbeat something flickered in his eyes. A fracture in the blankness. A flash of confusion, of struggle, as if a man trapped underwater was clawing toward the surface, then it vanished. "Vaelith," he said. His voice was flat, toneless, a dead man's voice speaking a living woman's name. "Vaelith Morghaven." The throne hall erupted. Wolves howled their approval. Nobles clasped hands. Warriors stamped their boots against the stone floor in thunderous applause. The Morghavens had won. The alliance was sealed. And in the gallery above, Sable felt the world crack beneath her. The mark on her wrist screamed with pain. Not the dull throb she had grown used to, but a searing, tearing agony, as if invisible jaws were ripping the scar from her flesh. She bit down on her own hand to keep from crying out, tasting blood as her teeth broke skin. Through the lattice, she watched Rannoch take Vaelith's hand, watched him press his lips to her knuckles in the ritual gesture of acceptance. Watched the copper-haired woman smile with the satisfaction of a hunter who had cornered her prey. Rannick's face showed nothing. No triumph, no tenderness, no regret, nothing at all. A sound escaped Sable's throat, not a sob. Something worse. A low, keening whimper that she did not recognize as her own voice. She had to leave. Now. Before the grief swallowed her whole. Before she did something desperate like throwing herself over the railing and demanding that he look at her. Really look at her. And explain how 11 months of whispered promises could end in a single dead-voiced word. Sable ran. The servants' corridors were deserted. She moved through them blind, one hand clamped over her burning wrist, the other braced against the wall. She reached her small chamber in the apothecary wing and began to pack. There was not much. A leather satchel of dried herbs, a change of clothes, the bone-handled knife her mother had left her. Her mother, Petra, had died 2 years ago in this very room, wasting away from a sickness no healer could name. In her final days, she had gripped Sable's hand with surprising strength and whispered words that made no sense at the time. When the truth finds you, do not be afraid of what you are. Promise me. Sable had promised without understanding. Now, standing in her dead mother's room with her world in ruins, the words returned like a ghost's breath on her neck. She pulled her cloak around her shoulders and moved to the window. The capital city of Ashenmere spread below her, bonfires blazing in celebration of the king's choice. No one would notice a servant girl slipping through the eastern gate. No one would care. "You swore to me," she whispered. "On the marrow of your ancestors. You swore." Then she turned away from the window and walked out of the only home she had ever known. She did not see the figure that appeared on the dais moments after she left. Did not see old Brennick, the king's first beta, seize Rannick by the shoulders and stare into those empty eyes with dawning horror. Did not hear Brennick's voice, low and urgent, cutting through the celebration. "Something is wrong with him. Look at his eyes. He has been dosed." And she did not hear the howl that split the night an hour later, when the compound finally burned through Rannick's blood, and the Alpha King woke from the fog with no memory of what he had done. A howl so raw, so wrecked, that wolves across Carveth stumbled in their tracks and whimpered without knowing why. By the time Rannick tore through the apothecary wing, her chamber was cold and empty. All that remained was the faint scent of juniper and grief. The months that followed were the longest of Sable's life. She traveled south, far beyond the borders of Carveth, into the scattered hill villages of Dunmara, where wolves were few and questions were fewer. She gave her name as Wren, called herself a war widow, and let the dark circles under her eyes tell whatever story people wanted to believe. The village of Greybeck took her in the way remote places absorb strays, slowly, without ceremony, but with a practical kindness that asked nothing in return except usefulness. Sable was useful. She knew herbs. She knew how to set a broken bone, how to ease a fever, how to brew a tea that soothed colicky infants and let exhausted mothers sleep. Within 2 months, she was the healer woman who lived in the old stone cottage at the edge of the birchwood. People came to her door with cuts and coughs and aching joints. She treated them, accepted whatever payment they could offer, and retreated behind her walls before anyone could get close enough to ask the questions she could not answer. The mark on her wrist refused to fade. That was the detail that haunted her most. Among wolf-kind, a rejected bond dissolved within weeks. The scar would pale, then vanish, leaving only smooth skin and the bitter knowledge of what had been lost. But hers had not paled. If anything, the crescent scar had darkened, deepening from silver to a bruised violet that pulsed with warmth she could not explain. It ached when the wind blew from the north, it throbbed during thunderstorms, and sometimes, before dawn, she would wake gasping from dreams that felt like someone else's, with the phantom sensation of hands searching for her in total darkness. She told herself it meant nothing. A bond could not survive a public binding to another. The old laws were clear, but her body disagreed. The other change was harder to deny. The nausea had started 2 weeks after her flight from Carveth. The tenderness followed. Then the exhaustion. The strange cravings. The way her sense of smell sharpened until she could identify individual herbs by scent from across a room. Sable had treated enough pregnant women to recognize the signs in herself. She was carrying Rannick's child. The realization had nearly undone her. She had knelt on the floor of her cottage and pressed both hands to her flat stomach, and wept until she had nothing left. His child, growing inside her while he paraded another woman before the realm. His heir, forming in silence while the name Valeth Morghaven echoed through every hall in Carveth. She had considered whether to keep it. Not because she did not want the child, but because she was not sure she could survive raising a piece of him. Every kick would be a reminder. Every feature that resembled his would be a knife twisting in a wound that refused to close. But when she placed her hands on her belly and felt the first tentative flutter of movement, the decision was made. This child was hers. Whatever Rannick had done, whatever he had chosen, this life belonged to her, and she would protect it with everything she had. Now, deep into her exile, Sable sat at the desk that had arrived 2 weeks ago from Carveth. Not from Rannick. From the estate executor who had handled her mother's affairs. Petra's personal effects, finally released from storage, a trunk of old clothes, a box of correspondence, and the writing desk itself, a scarred oak piece that Sable remembered from childhood. She had been putting off sorting through it. Every object carried the weight of memory, and memory was a luxury she could not afford when survival demanded all her attention. But tonight, the baby was restless. Sleep was impossible. And the desk sat in the corner of her cottage like an accusation, reminding her that her mother had been dead for 2 years and her belongings still lay untouched. Sable lit a candle and began to work. The drawers held nothing remarkable. Old receipts, a dried sprig of lavender, a letter from a healer in the southern provinces discussing a remedy for joint pain. Sable sorted through them mechanically, setting aside anything useful and discarding the rest. It was the bottom drawer that resisted. Sable tugged it, expecting warped wood. But the drawer was not stuck. It was shorter than the others, deliberately shorter, leaving a gap between its back panel and the rear of the desk. A hidden compartment. She reached into the gap and felt her fingers close around something flat and stiff. Paper, sealed with wax. The seal was old, cracked with age, but she could still make out the impression pressed into the dark wax. A crown above a wolf's jaw. The royal seal of Carveth. She broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was not her mother's. It was precise, formal, the script of someone trained in court correspondence. She read it once, then again, then a third time, because the words refused to assemble into anything that made sense. The letter was addressed to Petra Voss, dated 23 years ago, the year of Sable's birth, and signed by Aldrich Ashbourne, Rannick's father, the previous Alpha King. The contents were brief, but each sentence landed like a hammer blow. Petra, the child has been born healthy. As we agreed, she will bear your family name and be raised outside the bloodline. No record of her true parentage will exist within the royal archives. You have my gratitude and my silence. For the child's safety, and for the stability of the crown, this matter must remain buried. If the council ever learned that a second heir existed outside the sanctioned bloodline, neither you nor the child would survive the political fallout. Burn this letter. A second heir. Outside the sanctioned bloodline. Her mother had not burned the letter. She had hidden it in a desk and carried the secret to her grave. Sable pressed her hand to her mouth. The cottage seemed to tilt around her, the walls contracting and expanding with each ragged breath. She was not a nobody. She was not a nameless servant's daughter who had stumbled into the king's bed by accident. She was Ashbourne, not Rannick's sibling. The dates did not work. Aldrich had taken multiple consorts before his sanctioned mate produced Rannick. This letter predated Rannick's birth by 3 years. Sable was the daughter of a previous consort, hidden away to prevent a succession crisis. The elder heir the crown had buried to keep the bloodline clean, which meant the bond between her and Rannoch was not a mistake. It was the truest bond the royal bloodline had produced in generations, two wolves of the same ancient blood recognizing each other across the lie that had separated them. And the Morghavens, the family that had stolen Rannoch's choice, had no idea what they had truly cost themselves. The child growing inside her was not the illegitimate child of a servant and a king. It was the heir of two royal bloodlines. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if punctuating the revelation. The mark on her wrist flared with sudden heat, and somewhere in the far north, she could have sworn she felt the echo of a heartbeat that was not her own. The traitor who brought the news was a squat, weathered man named Doric, who visited Greybeck every 6 weeks, with salt, iron nails, and gossip from the wider world. Sable normally avoided him, but this morning, 5 months pregnant and unable to sleep after 3 nights of burning dreams, she came to the village well for water and found herself caught in the current of his audience. "Carveth is eating itself alive," Doric told the gathered villagers. "The Alpha King has lost his mind. He has sent wolves to every province, every village, and every farmstead in the realm. He is searching for a woman, and he describes her only by a mark, a crescent scar on the inside of her wrist. Whoever finds her gets 15,000 gold." Sable's blood turned to ice. She pulled her sleeve down, covering the scar. "But that is not the worst of it. The harvests are failing. Cattle have gone strange. Wolves in the border villages have started turning feral, attacking livestock, threatening travelers. The old wolves say it is punishment. When a true bond is severed, the land that belongs to that alpha suffers. The longer the separation lasts, the worse it becomes." The gathered villagers murmured uneasily. A woman named Fenna clutched her child closer. "How long can it last?" someone asked. Doric shrugged. "Until the bond is completed or until the alpha goes feral. And from what I have heard, the second option is growing more likely by the day." Back in her cottage, Sable pressed her palms against her eyes and tried to stop her hands from shaking. He was searching for her, tearing his kingdom apart to find her. And the land was dying because their bond was incomplete. But he had chosen Valeth. She had watched him do it, had watched his mouth form the name, had watched his hand take hers, unless he had not been the one speaking. Unless the blankness she had seen in his eyes was not indifference but absence. A knock at her door. She grabbed the bone-handled knife. "Mistress Wren, my name is Brennick. I serve the Alpha King of Carveth. I am alone, and I am unarmed. I need to speak with you." She opened the door with the knife behind her back. Brennick looked older than she remembered. The deep lines bracketing his mouth had multiplied, and his gray hair was thinner, cropped close to the skull in the way of wolves who had stopped caring about appearance. He was wearing traveling clothes, not the formal Beta's uniform she remembered, and his boots were caked with weeks of road dust. When he saw her standing in the doorway with her pregnant belly straining against her dress, something in his weathered expression cracked. "Thank the old blood. You are alive. My name is Wren. I am a healer. You have the wrong cottage." His gaze dropped to her left wrist where her sleeve had ridden up, exposing the edge of the crescent scar. "You are Sable Voss. You bear the king's mark. And you carry his child." He met her eyes. "I traced your mother's estate records. The desk shipment to Greybeck led me here. My lady, may I come in? What I have to tell you cannot be spoken on a doorstep." She stepped aside. Brennick entered and his gaze snagged on the letter. On the broken royal seal. "You found it," he said. "Your mother's secret. You knew. I am one of 3 people alive who know the truth. Aldrich told me before he died. He made me swear to protect you from a distance." Brennick turned to face her. "I failed. The moment Rannoch's wolf recognized you as his bonded, the protection of anonymity was doomed. I should have told Rannoch the truth before the Morghavens made their move." "You mean the binding? When he chose Valeth? He did not choose her." The words hit her like a physical blow. She took a step backward, her shoulders striking the wall. "The night of the binding rite, Someone introduced a compound into Rannick's wine during the preparatory feast. Our healers have since identified wolfsbane cut with stonecap root, a combination that suppresses the wolf consciousness entirely and leaves the human mind in a suggestible stupor. He was not choosing Valith. He was not choosing anything. He was a puppet with someone else's hand inside him. Sable's legs gave out. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, the knife clattering from nerveless fingers. "That is not possible," she whispered. "I saw his face. There was nothing there. No struggle, no resistance. Because there was no one home to struggle. His wolf was chemically buried. His conscious mind was suppressed to the point where he could follow simple verbal commands but nothing more. Walk forward. Speak the name. Take the hand." Brennick's voice was controlled, but she could hear the fury beneath it. Someone coached him through every step of that ceremony like a trained animal. The image was obscene. Rannick, the most powerful wolf she had ever known, reduced to a marionette on a poisoner's strings. "Who?" Sable demanded. "We believe House Morghaven arranged it, though we have not yet found the individual who administered the compound." Brennick withdrew a folded paper. "But there is more. This was intercepted 3 weeks ago, a Morghaven courier heading south." The message was partially decoded. "The hidden bloodline has been located in the southern hill country. Dispatch has been arranged. The heir she carries cannot be allowed to reach term. House Morghaven's claim to the throne must remain unchallenged." Sable's hand moved to her belly. They knew about her parentage, knew about the baby, and they had sent someone to kill her. "Rannick is coming for you," Brennick said. "The bond is pulling him south. Every day his control slips further. An alpha separated from his bonded this long, with the bond incomplete. His wolf is fighting for permanent dominance. If the bond is not completed, he will go feral. I cannot go back to Carveth. The Morghavens control the western armies. Valith has been named his bound. If I walk into that court, I am dead. Which is why I have not told Rannick your exact location. If I can bring you to him on neutral ground, with enough loyal guard to ensure your safety." A sound from outside cut him off. Low, guttural. The rumble of a growl that came from many throats at once. Brennick was on his feet instantly, moving to the window. His face changed. 7. Dark-furred. Morghaven colors. They have surrounded the cottage. The scar on Sable's wrist erupted with heat so intense she gasped. And somewhere to the north, still miles away but closing fast, a howl tore through the evening sky. The hunters had arrived, and the hunted was running out of time. The first wolf hit the door before Sable could stand. The wood splintered inward. Brennick shoved her behind the desk, drew his short sword, and met the lunging wolf with a slash that opened a red line across its muzzle. 2 more pushed through the ruined doorway, soldiers in animal form flanking him, while a 4th circled toward the shattered window. A wolf clamped its jaws around Brennick's forearm with a wet crunch. He transferred the sword to his damaged hand, grabbed the wolf by the scruff, and hurled it into the wall. But more were coming through the window. He was one aging beta against 7 trained killers, and his movements were slowing. Sable looked at her hands. She had spent her life hiding what they could do. Her mother had made her swear never to reveal it. Healing magic in someone of common blood was dangerous enough. In someone secretly of royal blood, it would be a death sentence, but she was already marked for death. The secret her mother had died to protect was already exposed. She pressed her palms together and let the thing she had kept caged since childhood open its eyes. The warmth started in her chest. Not the gentle heat of her healing work with herbs. Something older. It rose through her like dawn breaking underground, and when it reached her hands, light spilled between her fingers. Golden, fierce, alive. She walked toward Brennick, knelt, and pressed her glowing hands to the ragged wound on his forearm. Torn muscle knitted beneath her palms. Cracked bone fused. The wound closed, leaving only a raised pink line. A wolf lunged. Sable raised her hand, palm outward, and the radiance exploded from her in a concussive wave. 3 wolves were hurled backward through the doorway, their fur smoking. 2 bolted into the birchwood. The third dragged itself away with a broken whimper. But 4 remained. And they were not running. The largest, a scarred brute with a torn ear, snarled low in its throat. It had measured her power and decided she was spent. It was right. The healing and the blast had drained her. Her vision swam. Her hands trembled. Sable backed against the wall. Her hand moved to cover the child. The baby was moving frantically inside her. The scarred wolf coiled to spring. And then the sky split open. A howl that belonged to no category she knew. It was fury and grief and madness compressed into a single note so vast it seemed to crack the air itself. The trees at the edge of the birchwood bent as if struck by a gale. The Morghaven wolves stopped dead, their aggression dissolving into something Sable had never seen in a trained war wolf. Terror. The scarred wolf turned toward the tree line, its ears pinned flat, and ran. The others scattered into the darkness. Something enormous crashed through the undergrowth, snapping birch trunks like matchsticks. A shape burst from the tree line. This wolf was something past the boundaries of what a normal shift produced. It stood taller than any horse, its fur black as a void between stars, its eyes burning with an amber light that matched the fading glow in her own hands. Muscle rolled beneath its pelt like tectonic plates shifting. The wolf stopped at the edge of the clearing. Those burning eyes found her. For a terrible moment, Sable was not sure the man she knew was still inside that creature. This was a wolf on the edge of feral, an alpha whose bond madness had pushed him to the border of the abyss. The wolf took a step toward her, then another. Each footfall deliberate, careful, as if it was fighting its own body for control. It reached her, and lowered its massive head until its nose brushed her belly. The baby kicked, both sides at once, 2 distinct impacts, as if 2 small bodies were reaching for their father through the wall of flesh that separated them. The wolf made a sound, not a growl, not a whimper. Something between the two, a broken note that held more emotion than any human word could carry. Those eyes lifted to her face, and Sable saw him, not the animal. Not the alpha on the edge of madness. Him. Rannick. The man who had pressed his forehead to hers in a dark cellar and promised her the world. He was still in there, trapped behind the wolf's fury, fighting to stay human for her. "I see you," Sable whispered. "I see you, Rannick. Come back." The shift was violent. Bones cracked and reformed. Fur receded in ragged patches. The massive wolf collapsed inward on itself until a man knelt in the dirt before her, naked and shaking, his hands hovering over her stomach as though he was terrified to touch her. He looked up. The Alpha King of Carveth was weeping. Not silently. Not with the restrained dignity of a ruler managing his emotions. He was weeping the way a man weeps when he has been hollowed out by months of anguish, and the thing he thought he had lost forever is standing in front of him, alive and whole, and carrying his children. "You are here," he said. His voice was destroyed, raw. "You are real. Tell me you are real." Sable reached down and took his face in her hands. "I am real." A sound tore from Rannick's chest. He pressed his head to her belly and wrapped his arms around her, and held on with a grip that made her bones ache. Beneath her hands, his entire body shook. The baby kicked again. Both sides. 2 lives reaching for their father. "Twins," Sable said softly. "I think there are 2 of them." Rannick made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "I searched everywhere. Every village, every forest. Every night I felt you through the mark. This faint pulse telling me you were alive. And every morning I woke not knowing if today was the day it would stop." She had felt it too. Every night. That searching presence pushing against her consciousness. She had told herself it was a phantom, a ghost of a dead bond. It had been him. Every single night. "I thought you threw me away," she whispered. Rannick flinched as though she had driven a blade between his ribs. "I did not choose her. I did not choose anything. They took my will and used my body like a weapon against the only person I have ever loved. The word trembled between them. Loved. He had never said it aloud before. In all their months of stolen moments and whispered promises, he had said bonded, chosen, mine, but never the word itself. She was not ready to forgive. Not yet. The wound was too deep. The memory of his dead voice saying another woman's name too fresh, even with the knowledge that he had been drugged. But she was ready to listen. Get up, she said. We have a great deal to talk about. Brennick reported the Morghaven wolves had scattered. Rannick asked if she would come with him. Not a command. A question, raw and open, from a king who understood that he had no right to ask anything of the woman he had failed. I will come, she said. But not as your prize, Rannick. Not as something you found and reclaimed. I come as myself. And there are things you need to know about who I actually am. They rode north through the night. Rannick lifted Sable onto the saddle before she could protest, then swung up behind her, his arms circling her waist, his chest solid against her back. My wolf needs you close, he said when she stiffened. The separation nearly killed us both. I cannot explain it in any way that does not sound like desperation, so I will be honest. If I cannot feel you against me right now, I do not think I can hold the animal back. His voice cracked on the last words, and Sable heard the truth beneath them. The feral edge she had seen in his wolf form was not a performance. Rannick Ashbourne, the most feared alpha in 3 territories, was holding himself together with willpower and nothing else. She leaned back against him. The baby settled immediately, as if the proximity to its father was a sedative. For the first hour, neither of them spoke. The silence was not comfortable. It was loaded, pressurized, a dam holding back months of grief and rage and questions that needed answers. Sable broke it first. You want to know why I ran without telling you about the child. I want to know everything. But yes, that is where the wound is deepest. When I stood in that gallery and watched you choose Valeth Morghaven, I thought, he was always going to do this. The promises were real in the moment, but when the moment of truth arrived, he chose power. He chose the copper-haired daughter of a great house over the nobody who mixed his headache tonics. She felt his chest shudder against her back. I stood in that gallery with your child growing inside me and thought, if I tell him about the baby now, it will look like a trap. A desperate servant trying to chain a king with a pregnancy. So I ran, because running was the only option that left me any shred of dignity. Everything you just described was wrong, Rannick said. Not because you are foolish, but because you were working with poisoned information. You watched a puppet, not a man. He paused. That is what the Morghaven stole from us. Not just the binding night. They stole your faith in me. And that is the crime I will never forgive them for. His hand found hers in the darkness and held it. I woke 3 days after the ceremony in a room I did not recognize, wearing clothes I did not remember putting on, with Valeth Morghaven sitting beside my bed telling me we were bound. I threw her out. Physically. She hit the corridor wall hard enough to crack the plaster, and I do not regret it for one heartbeat. The first thing I did was run to your room. Your things were gone. The room smelled like you, like juniper and that soap you make from goat's milk, and I stood in that empty room and I fell apart in a way I did not know I was capable of. His voice had gone hoarse, stripped of authority and armor. I have barely slept. I have barely eaten. My council thinks I am mad. Half my lords have withdrawn their support. Brennick has been holding the kingdom together while I tore apart every corner of the realm looking for a scent trail that was months cold. Sable's throat tightened. The land is suffering. The crops. The feral wolves. Doric the traitor said, the land suffers because I suffer. Because the bond was sealed but never completed. And my wolf has been screaming for its mate every moment of every day since you left. An alpha's bond is tied to the territory. When the bond bleeds, the land bleeds with it. The weight of that settled over her like snowfall, an entire kingdom suffering because she and Rannick were apart. "There is something else you need to know," Sable said. "Something that changes everything." She told him about the letter, his father's handwriting, the hidden heir, the second bloodline, the secret that Petra Voss had carried to her grave and hidden in a desk drawer because she could not bring herself to destroy it. "My father," he said at last, and the word carried a weight she had never heard from him before. "My father knew. He knew about you, about your mother, about the bloodline, and he buried it. To protect the succession, to protect me, according to the letter. To protect himself. He was afraid. A second heir, older than me, born outside the sanctioned line. If the council had learned of your existence, it would have fractured the kingdom. He chose stability over truth." "And your mother?" "My mother died when I was 7. I do not know if she knew." Rannick's hand moved to her belly. "But it does not matter. What matters is what this means now. You are not just my bonded Sable. You are Ashborn by blood, the elder line, and the children you carry are the legitimate heirs of both branches of the royal house." "The Morghavens know," Sable said. "The intercepted message Brennick showed me. They know about my parentage. That is why they want me dead. Not just because I am your bonded. Because I am a rival claimed to the throne." When he spoke again, his voice had shifted. No longer the man confessing his grief. This was the Alpha King, cold and calculating and certain. "They drugged me to steal my choice. They sent assassins after my bonded and my unborn children. And they have been conspiring to erase a legitimate heir of the Ashaborn line. When we reach Carveth, they will answer for every one of those crimes." She studied his face. In the moonlight, the shadows beneath his eyes were deep as bruises. His cheekbones were sharper than she remembered. Months of anguish had carved him down to something lean and dangerous. The amber eyes burned with a conviction she could feel through their link. "You said when we reach Carveth," she said. "But the Morghavens have the Western armies. Valeth has been named your bound. Walking into that court puts a target on my back." "The target is already on your back. It has been since the night you fled. The only question is whether you face it alone, or with me beside you." He cupped her face with one hand, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "I failed you once, Sable. I will die before I fail you again." She believed him, not because the bond told her to, because she had spent months watching the scar on her wrist burn with the evidence of his searching, and she understood now that a man who tears his kingdom apart to find you is not a man who will ever willingly let you go. "Together then," she said. They reached the borders of Carveth at dawn. The capital city of Ashenmere rose from the northern plains like a crown of stone and iron. Then she saw the smoke, and the wrong banner above the main gate. Not the Black Wolf of Ashbourne, but a silver serpent coiled around a sword. Morghaven colors. A scout came galloping. "Lord Morghaven declared himself regent at midnight. He claims you have abandoned the throne. They have taken prisoners, 41 wolves who refused to bend. He says they will be executed at midday. Among them is the old healer, Bettany." Bettany. Who had taught Sable which herbs to pick and which to avoid? Who had covered for her absences? Who had looked at the scar on Sable's wrist one morning and said nothing except, "Be careful, child. Kings make promises the crown will not let them keep." "We have to save them," Sable said. Rannick looked at her for a long moment. Something passed across his face, not frustration, not condescension. Pride. "My queen," he murmured. He turned to the assembled wolves behind them. Hundreds of loyalists who had followed their alpha south on instinct and north again on faith. "The Morghavens believe they have won. They sit in our halls and wear our crown and call themselves rulers of a kingdom they poisoned from within." His voice carried across the ranks like a war drum. "They are wrong. Today we take back what is ours. Today we show every wolf in Carveth what happens to traitors who threaten our king, our true queen, and the heirs she carries." The howl that rose from the assembled wolves shook the earth, and at the front of that army, the Alpha King rode toward the city that had been stolen from him. The outer walls fell within the hour. Rannoch's forces hit the western postern gate with a ferocity the Morghavens had not anticipated, overwhelming the defenders before they could organize a coherent response. Sable watched from a fortified position on the eastern ridge as Rannoch led the charge in wolf form. She could feel his fury through their link, a white-hot current that scorched through her veins. Within 2 hours, the castle gates were breached, but a runner brought news that turned the victory to ash. Lord Morghaven had sealed himself in the throne hall with the prisoners. If the king did not surrender, he would execute every hostage, one every quarter hour, starting with the old healer. Sable found Rannoch at the throne hall doors, held back by Brennick and 4 wolves blocking his path. "If you go in there, you give him exactly what he wants," Brennick was saying. "He will force a surrender and have you executed. And if I do nothing, 41 innocent wolves die." Rannoch. He spun at her voice. His eyes were blazing, his wolf so close to the surface she could see dark fur shimmering beneath his skin. "Those people are there because of their loyalty to you and their kindness to me. I will not let them die while I stand out here doing nothing." She stepped closer. "Morghaven has 41 expendable hostages. What he truly needs is me, the hidden heir, the rival bloodline, the woman carrying the future of the Ashbourne line. I walk in and offer myself in exchange. He takes the trade." "No. It is not yours to let." She placed her hand on his chest. She felt his panic, his fury. She also felt the part of him that recognized she was right. "Trust me, the way I am trusting you." He did not stop her. She called through the throne hall doors. "Lord Morghaven, my name is Sable Voss, daughter of Petra Voss and Aldrich Ashbourne. I am the woman your family has been trying to kill. I am coming in alone." The throne hall held 41 prisoners kneeling in a line before the dais, hands bound with iron chains. On the throne sat Lord Corvin Morghaven, a lean man with silver-streaked hair and the cold eyes of someone who calculated the value of every living thing within his reach. Beside him stood Valeth. Sable found Bettany in the line. The old healer's face was bruised, one eye swollen shut. "Run, girl," Bettany rasped. "They will kill you." "Release the prisoners," Sable told Morghaven. "Take me instead." Morghaven weighed the value of expendable hostages against a pregnant woman who represented a rival bloodline and the key to controlling the current king. "The girl is right. She is worth more than every prisoner combined. Release the hostages. Secure the woman." The prisoners were cut free. The doors closed, and Sable was alone with the Morghavens. Iron shackles closed around her wrists. The metal pressed against her bond mark and sent a jolt of cold through her body. Iron dampened wolf magic. Morghaven knew what he was doing, but Sable's power was not wolf magic. She had never understood the distinction until this moment. The healing warmth that lived in her hands, the radiance that had scattered Morghaven wolves in her cottage. It did not come from the wolf inside her. It came from somewhere else, somewhere older. A bloodline gift that predated the wolf curse entirely. The iron did nothing to suppress it. She held still. She kept her breathing even, her expression submissive, her body language radiating the defeated posture of a woman who knew she was trapped. And beneath the iron, she felt the warmth begin to build. Valeth descended the dais and stopped before her. "You actually believed he chose you. A servant girl, a nobody mixing herbs. You thought a king would lower himself to bond with someone like you, when women like me have been bred for this our entire lives." "He did choose me. Without drugs. Without his father's armies as a dowry. His wolf recognized mine, and your family had to poison him to override what nature itself had decided." Valeth's hand cracked across Sable's face. She tasted blood, but did not look away. "Hit me again. It will not change what you already know. He will never be yours." Valeth grabbed a sword from the nearest soldier and raised it above her head. "Then I will make sure he has nothing to come back to." The blade began its descent, and the baby moved. Not a kick. A detonation of energy that erupted from her womb and flooded every cell with a power so vast it blinded her. The iron shackles exploded. Fragments of metal shrieked across the hall. Valeth was hurled backward against the dais. Radiance poured from Sable in waves. And then the transformation began. Sable screamed, not from fear, from the sheer physical violence of what was happening inside her body. Every bone was breaking, every muscle was tearing itself apart and reforming in configurations that should not have been possible. Her skin rippled as something pushed through from beneath. She was shifting. She had never shifted before. In 23 years, her mother had taught her to suppress the wolf, to keep the animal buried, to deny that part of herself in the name of survival. But the babies had other plans. The babies, the product of two Ashbourne bloodlines, reunited after a generation apart, carried a magic that would not be denied. They had felt the threat to their mother. They had felt the blade descending. And they had responded with the only defense they possessed. They had triggered the wolf. Sable's vision went white. She was aware of shouting, of bodies scrambling away from her, of Morghaven bellowing orders that no one was obeying. She was aware of the hall doors exploding inward as a massive black wolf burst through them with a roar that shook dust from the ceiling. Rannick. He was there. She could feel him through their link, a blazing sun of rage and terror and love, fighting his way toward her through a hall of panicking soldiers. The transformation completed in a burst of amber light so intense it left afterimages on the walls. Where a pregnant woman had knelt in chains, a wolf now stood. Her fur was white as bone, luminous, almost glowing in the dim hall. Her eyes burned amber shot through with veins of gold that pulsed with the rhythm of her heartbeat. She was not as large as Rannick's massive form, but she radiated a power that made every wolf in the room, including the Morghaven soldiers, lower their heads in reflexive submission. Lord Corvin Morghaven descended from the throne with a wolfsbane-coated blade leveled at her chest. "Abomination! Whatever you are no natural wolf." Sable lunged, her jaws closed around the blade itself and wrenched it from his grip. Then she pinned him to the floor with one massive paw on his chest. Morghaven stared up at her with pure, absolute terror. Across the hall, Rannick's black wolf tore through the last soldiers foolish enough to resist. Valeth was screaming from behind a pillar. Sable shifted back. She stood barefoot on the cold stone, one hand resting where the twins still moved, unharmed. "You drugged my bonded," she said, her voice carrying the dual resonance of human and wolf. "You stole his will. You sent assassins to murder me and the children I carry. You tried to erase a bloodline that has as much right to this throne as any in Carveth." She leaned closer. "And you failed." Rannick shifted beside her, human again. He reached for her hand and held it. "Lord Corvin Morghaven, Valeth Morghaven. You are charged with treason against the crown, the drugging and manipulation of the Alpha King, the attempted murder of the true queen and the royal heirs, and conspiracy to eliminate a legitimate Ashbourne bloodline." "She is no queen," Valeth spat. "You chose me, before the entire realm. A puppet spoke your name. The binding is void. It was always void." Around them, loyalist wolves secured the hall. The coup was over. But the most important moment had not yet arrived. The throne hall emptied slowly. Prisoners were reunited with families who wept in the corridors. Healers moved through the castle tending the wounded. Sable stood at the center of the hall where she had nearly died, watching it all with a stillness that surprised her. The transformation had burned away something that had been clouding her vision for years. Fear, perhaps, or the habit of making herself small, of dimming herself to fit into spaces that were never meant to contain what she truly was. She was done being small. Rannick had not left her side. He stood beside her with his hand resting on the small of her back, and every few minutes his fingers would press against her spine, a tactile reassurance that she was still there, still solid, still real. "There is one more thing that must happen," he said. before the kingdom can heal, before the land can recover. Sable knew what he meant. The bond was sealed on her side. His teeth had marked her wrist months ago, but his side remained unclaimed. The circuit had only one terminal. It needed two. He tilted his head, baring the left side of his throat. The gesture was ancient, absolute. A wolf offering the most vulnerable part of its body to its mate. Claim me, Sable. Not because I am asking, not because the kingdom needs it, but because you choose me the way I chose you, freely, with no poison and no politics between us. She looked at the man before her, the Alpha King of Carveth, who commanded armies and made lesser wolves bow with a glance. He was offering her his throat, his vulnerability, his complete surrender. She understood now that none of what she had witnessed at the binding had been real. And when he woke, he had torn his kingdom apart to find her. Not because she was useful, not because she was secretly royal, not because she carried his heirs. He had searched before he knew any of those things. He had searched because a world without her in it was a world he refused to accept. I choose you, Sable said. I chose you in the cellar when you kissed me for the first time, and your hands were shaking. I chose you in my exile when I could have let the bond die and started over. I chose you in that cottage when I could have run, and instead, I stayed to fight. She stepped closer, placing her hands on his chest. I choose you now. Not the crown, not the throne, not the Ashaborn name. You, Rannick, the man who shakes when he touches me, the wolf who howled for months because his mate was gone. She rose on her toes, her lips finding the place where his neck met his shoulder. She could feel his pulse hammering beneath the skin, rapid and urgent, a drumbeat that resonated through their link and made her own heart race in answer. Her wolf rose inside her, guiding her instincts with an ancient certainty that required no thought. She bit down. The bond detonated. It was an explosion, a supernova of shared consciousness that obliterated the boundaries between them and rebuilt them into something new. Sable felt Rannick's memories pour into her. She saw the binding through his eyes, the cup of wine pressed into his hand by a servant he did not recognize, the first wave of fog rolling through his mind, the sudden disconnection from his wolf that felt like having a limb amputated without warning. She felt his wolf screaming inside the chemical cage, howling for her with an anguish that would have shattered stone. She saw him 3 days later, waking with Valeth beside the bed. She felt his confusion, then the horror, then the moment he reached for the bond and found it stretched thin and screaming across a distance it should never have had to span. She felt him run to the apothecary wing and find the room empty. She felt the collapse inside his chest. She felt the months of searching, the sleepless nights, the maps covered in marks and crossed-out coordinates, the reports that said nothing, no trace, no trail, no sign. His wolf clawing for control, the animal logic that said the only solution was to run and never stop running until it found her. She felt the moment Brennick told him she had been located, the way his legs gave out, the way he sat on the floor of his war room and pressed his face into his hands and made a sound that was not a word, but carried more meaning than any language could hold. And she felt him riding south, feeling her mark burn on his wrist like a beacon, knowing she was close, terrified that when he arrived, she would be gone again or worse, that the Morghavens would have reached her first and the pulse he felt through their connection would simply stop. Sable was weeping. She could not help it. The weight of his suffering was immense, and she felt every ounce of it as if she had lived it herself. But the bond flowed both ways. Rannick saw himself through her eyes, not the king, not the alpha, the man in the cellar whose hands trembled when he touched her face, the man who brought her wildflowers picked on his morning patrols and tucked them into her apron without saying a word, the man who held her in the dark and whispered that she was the only thing in his life that felt real. He saw what the poison choice had done to her. The moment in the gallery when his puppet voice said Valeth's name, and something inside her shattered like glass dropped on stone. The flight through the servants' corridors, blind with tears, one hand clutching the mark that burned on her wrist. The long months in Greybeck where she lay awake feeling the phantom echo of his searching and telling herself it meant nothing. He felt the moment she discovered the letter, the way the ground shifted beneath her identity. The realization that she was not a nobody who had stumbled into a king's affection, but a woman whose very existence had been erased to preserve a political arrangement. And he felt, woven through all of it like a thread of gold through dark cloth, the love she had never stopped carrying, even in the worst of her exile, even when she believed he had abandoned her, even when she pressed her hands to her stomach and told herself the child would never know its father. The love had persisted, stubborn and fierce and irrational, burning in her chest like the scar on her wrist that refused to fade. Because true bonds do not break. They bend. They stretch across distances that should destroy them. They survive poison and betrayal and silence, but they do not break. I see you, he whispered. All of you. Everything you carried. Everything you survived. Sable, you are the most extraordinary soul I have ever known. She laughed through her tears. You are biased. I am bonded. There is a difference. He leaned his forehead against hers. And I am yours. In this life, and every life that follows. Around them, wolves had gathered in the doorways of the throne hall. They watched in silence as the warmth of the completed bond radiated outward from the two figures at the center of the hall. Then, one by one, they lifted their voices. The howl started low, a single voice near the main doors. Then another joined, and another, until the sound filled the hall and spilled through the windows into the streets of Ashenmere and beyond, carried across the rooftops and the forests, until wolves in the farthest reaches of Carveth raised their heads and added their voices to the chorus. A celebration, a declaration. The bond is complete. The king has found his mate. The world is right again. In the weeks that followed, Carveth began to heal. Crops that had withered began to green within days. Rain returned to regions that had suffered drought. Feral wolves blinked awake as if from a nightmare, confused but whole. Packs reformed. Territory disputes were settled without bloodshed. Lord Corvin Morghaven stood trial before the assembled packs on the first day of the new moon. The charges were read aloud in the throne hall where he had briefly sat on a stolen throne. Treason, the chemical manipulation of the Alpha King, conspiracy to murder the Queen and the royal heirs, and the systematic erasure of a legitimate Ashbourne bloodline. He offered no defense. The evidence was overwhelming. The Wolfsbane compound had been traced to a Morghaven apothecary. The intercepted courier message bore his personal cipher. 3 members of his own guard testified against him, describing a plan that had been years in the making. Morghaven was executed at dawn. His final words were a curse directed at Sable, silenced before he could finish. Valeth's fate was different. Sable argued against execution. Kill her and she becomes a martyr. Let her live, but strip her of everything: her name, her house, her wolf. Let the realm watch a Morghaven reduced to nothing. That is a punishment that teaches. Rannick had studied her and smiled. The slow, genuine smile she remembered from the cellar, the one that made his hard face young again. You will be a formidable queen. Valeth was exiled to the salt flats of the southern wastes, stripped of her family name and her ability to shift, condemned to live out her days in the barren landscape she had once mocked as beneath her notice. She left Ashenmere in a cart with no escort, her copper hair shorn to the scalp, her green eyes empty of everything except the dull recognition that she had lost. Sable watched her go from the castle wall and felt nothing, not satisfaction, not pity, only the quiet certainty that justice had been served and the page had been turned. The truth of Sable's parentage was revealed to the realm in a formal ceremony that Brennick orchestrated with the precision of a man who had been preparing for this moment since the day Aldrich Ashbourne first confessed the secret. The letter was read aloud, The bloodline was confirmed by the kingdom's oldest lore keepers, who declared the bond between Sable and Rannoch the strongest true mate pairing in 5 generations. The people's reaction surprised Sable. She had expected resistance, suspicion, the uncomfortable silence of a kingdom being asked to accept a servant as their queen. Instead, she found acceptance. The wolves of Carveth could feel the completed bond radiating from their alpha and his mate. They could sense the rightness of it in their bones, a resonance that went deeper than politics or bloodlines. This was fate, and even wolves who had supported the Morghavens found themselves unable to argue with what their instincts told them. On a warm evening in late autumn, 16 weeks after the battle for Ashenmere, Sable went into labor. Old Bettany arrived within minutes, her sharp tongue intact. "Put her down and get out of my way," Bettany told the Alpha King without a trace of deference. "You have done your part. This is my domain now." Rannoch did not leave. He sat behind Sable on the bed, her back against his chest, his hands in hers, anchoring her through contractions that made her vision blur and her wolf howl inside her chest. The first child came as the sun dipped below the horizon. A girl, small but fierce, with a cap of dark hair and eyes that flickered amber from the moment they opened. She announced herself with a cry so sharp that Brannock, standing guard outside the door, flinched and then laughed. The second arrived minutes later, a boy, quieter than his sister, with lighter coloring and his mother's delicate features. He did not cry. He opened his eyes, looked up at Sable's face, and reached for her with a tiny hand that glowed faintly at the fingertips. "A healer," Bettany breathed. "Blood and bone, the boy is already manifesting." Rannoch was trembling behind her, crying silently into her hair. "They are perfect," he whispered. She leaned back against him and let her own tears fall. Not from grief, not from pain. From a joy so vast her body did not know how to contain it. She had spent her whole life believing she was nobody, a servant's daughter. A healer with a gift she had to hide. She was not nobody. She had never been nobody. "What will we name them?" Rannoch asked. She looked at her daughter, dark-haired and fierce, already gripping her mother's finger with surprising strength. Then at her son, quiet and luminous. "The girl is Petra. For my mother, who gave up everything to keep me alive. And the boy?" She thought about letters hidden in desks, about secrets carried to graves, about a man she had never met who had made a terrible choice for what he believed were the right reasons, and in doing so had set in motion a chain of events that nearly destroyed his own bloodline. "Aldrich," she said, "for your father, who was wrong about many things, but who loved his children enough to try to protect them, even if his methods were flawed." Rannoch's arms tightened around her. Through their bond she felt grief for the father who had failed them both, gratitude for the woman who could find forgiveness, and love, so deep it had no bottom, so wide it had no edges, filling every hollow space inside her. "Petra and Aldrich Ashbourne," he said, "heirs of 2 bloodlines, children of the truest bond this kingdom has seen in 5 generations." He kissed her then, slowly, deliberately, a kiss that was not about passion or urgency, but about permanence, a seal set upon something that would never be broken again. Outside their window, the wolves of Carveth raised their voices, a howl of celebration that rippled outward from the castle like rings on water, spreading across the capital, across the forests and mountains until the entire kingdom sang with one voice. "Welcome, welcome, young wolves, welcome home." They had been torn apart by lies, they had found each other through truth, and they would never be separated again. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story.